The restaurant was one of those elegant places designed to make people whisper without realizing they were doing it. Soft jazz played beneath the quiet murmur of expensive conversation. The glow of candlelight reflected off wine glasses, and the air carried the faint scent of rosemary and butter. It was Friday night, and the tables were filled with people in tailored suits, polished shoes, and watches that glimmered under the light. At the back of the room, a young waitress named Maya moved gracefully between tables, her tray balanced with practiced ease. She'd been working there for nearly a year, long enough to know every regular, every reservation, and every unspoken rule about how to survive in a room full of people who looked through you more often than at you. Maya was 28, working evenings while finishing her graduate degree in linguistics. Most nights she didn't mind the work. She liked the rhythm of the restaurant, the quiet coordination, the routine precision. But what she liked most was observing people. Their tones, their glances, the words they chose when they thought no one was really listening. That night, the corner table by the window belonged to a group of executives from a Paris-based investment firm. 4 men in expensive suits sat with glasses of red wine, their laughter loud and easy. The head of the group, a silver-haired man in his 50s named Bernard Laurent, had flown in that morning. He was one of those men who carried arrogance like a fragrance, subtle but impossible to ignore. When Maya approached their table, Bernard barely looked up. "Bonsoir, messieurs," she said with a polite smile, the greeting slipping out naturally. One of the men grinned. "Ah, you speak French?" "A little," she said modestly. Bernard chuckled, his accent thick and deliberate. "Un peu, I doubt that." He glanced at his colleagues, smirking. Then in French he muttered, "Je suppose qu'elle sait dire bonjour et merci, mais pas grand-chose d'autre." The men laughed softly. Maya didn't flinch. She kept her professional smile, even as she understood every word. "I suppose she knows how to say hello and thank you, but not much else." Her pen hovered above her notepad. "Would you like to start with drinks?" she asked smoothly. Bernard waved a dismissive hand. "We've already ordered wine." "Of course," she said, writing it down anyway, her tone calm. As she turned to leave, one of the younger executives muttered something else in French, amused. "Elle est jolie, mais elle n'a pas l'air très instruite." Pretty, but not very educated. Maya paused briefly before walking away. She felt the sting of it, not because it was new, but because it was so casual. They didn't even hide it. They said it as if her understanding was impossible, as if she existed outside their world. But she had spent years studying French literature, translating academic texts, and even teaching part-time at the university. She could have corrected their grammar if she wanted to. For now, though, she chose silence. She delivered their appetizers without another word, each movement precise, her face composed. When Bernard asked for an off-menu substitution in broken English, she answered in flawless French, "Je pense que le chef pourrait vous accommoder, monsieur, si vous êtes patient." The table fell quiet. Bernard's fork paused mid-air. "You speak French fluently?" he asked, switching languages now, his tone cautious. Maya tilted her head slightly, her voice polite but even. "Since I was 12. The men exchanged glances. Bernard's smirk returned, weaker now. "Impressive," he said in French, "but I didn't expect that." She met his gaze directly for the first time. "Non, vous ne l'avez pas fait," she replied. "No, you didn't." When she walked away, Bernard laughed softly, trying to recover his composure. But the moment lingered. His colleagues looked less amused now, and the easy arrogance at the table dimmed slightly. Later in the evening, as Maya cleared their dessert plates, Bernard leaned back and said in French, quieter this time, "It's good that you learned our language. It must help you serve better." Maya froze for a moment, then looked at him evenly. The words were polite, but the tone was condescending, a pat on the head disguised as a compliment. She set the last plate down gently, then responded in French, her tone calm but sharp as glace. "Je l'ai apprise pour comprendre les gens qui pensent comme vous. Et ça aide, monsieur, mais pas pour mieux servir, pour mieux voir." The translation rolled softly in the air before sinking in. "I learned it to understand people who think like you. And yes, it helps, but not to serve better, to see better." The table went still. No one laughed this time. Bernard's smirk faded completely, replaced by something unfamiliar, embarrassment. Maya gave a small, professional nod, switched back to English and said, "Enjoy the rest of your evening, gentlemen." As she walked away, The silence behind her was louder than any applause. By the next evening, the story of what had happened at that corner table had already spread quietly through the restaurant staff. In every industry, word travels fast, but in hospitality it travels like wind. Waiters whispered about it between shifts. The hostess retold it with growing admiration, and even the kitchen staff, usually too busy to care about the dining floor, had started smiling when Maya walked past. She didn't boast. She didn't correct anyone's version. She just kept working like she always did, steady, polite, and composed. But under that calm, she was thinking. The moment with Bernard had lingered in her mind, not as anger but as reflection. She'd faced prejudice before, in college, at interviews, even at casual dinners where people were surprised to learn how educated she was. But this one felt different because of how public it was, how unashamed he had been. It wasn't a mistake. It was entitlement spoken out loud, and she'd answered it the only way she knew how, with words that carried dignity instead of rage. When she arrived at work that night, the manager, Claire, pulled her aside. "Hey," she said quietly, smiling. "Just so you know, the CEO from last night's dinner called this morning." Maya frowned slightly. "Bernard Laurent." Claire nodded. "Yes, he asked for your full name. I didn't give it to him, of course. I told him we protect our staff's privacy. Did he say why?" Claire hesitated. "He said he wanted to apologize. He sounded embarrassed. And he mentioned something about returning tonight." Maya sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "If he comes back, I'll treat him like any other guest." Claire smiled softly. "That's exactly why everyone here respects you." That evening, the restaurant was even busier than before. Couples on dates, business meetings in motion, birthday dinners punctuated by laughter. The air smelled faintly of wine and butter, and Maya moved through it all with quiet efficiency. By 9 o'clock, the door opened again and Bernard walked in. This time he was alone. He stood at the entrance awkwardly for a moment before the hostess led him to a small table by the window. When Maya approached, he stood to greet her. The arrogance from the previous night was gone, replaced with something else, something that looked a lot like humility. "Good evening, monsieur," she said evenly. "Good evening, Miss—" He hesitated, unsure if she wanted to offer her name. She didn't. "I came to apologize," he said softly. "I was unkind yesterday." She studied him for a moment. "Unkind isn't the word I'd use, but I appreciate the effort." He nodded, accepting the quiet sting. "You were right," he said. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. That was wrong. I thought I was being clever. Instead, I was being small." Her expression stayed calm, but her voice softened slightly. "It takes a bigger person to admit that." He smiled faintly. "I suppose I learned that lesson the hard way." She set his glass of water on the table. "What would you like to order tonight?" He laughed lightly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Honestly, whatever you recommend. I think I trust your judgment more than mine." Maya allowed a small, genuine smile. "In that case, I'll bring you the chef's special. You'll like it." As she walked away, Bernard exhaled slowly, watching her go. He wasn't used to being humbled. People usually adjusted to his presence, not the other way around. But something about the way she had responded, so calm, so intelligent, without raising her voice, had pierced through his self-importance in a way few things ever had. When she returned with his meal, he looked up at her and said quietly, "I read about you. I found out you're a linguistics student." Maya set down the plate carefully. "You did some research?" He nodded, sheepish. "I had to know who could disarm me in perfect French." She smiled faintly. "It wasn't about disarming you. It was about reminding you that language doesn't belong to anyone." He looked down, the truth of that sinking in. "You're right. I use words as tools. You use them as bridges." She tilted her head. "Then maybe tonight you'll cross one." For the rest of the meal, Bernard ate quietly, occasionally watching her move from table to table with quiet admiration. When he was done, he asked for the check but found a note instead, a handwritten one from Maya. It read, "Respect doesn't require translation. It's universal." He folded the note carefully, slipping it into his jacket pocket like something precious. When he left that night, he paused at the door and looked back. She was helping another table, her focus steady, her voice calm. She didn't see him, but that didn't matter. The message had already reached him. Outside, Bernard stood in the cool night air for a long time before calling his driver. He thought about how easily he had once used words to draw lines between himself and others, and how quickly one woman's grace had erased them. By the time the next weekend arrived, Maya's life inside the restaurant had shifted in quiet, subtle ways. Customers smiled more when she approached, the kitchen staff greeted her with genuine warmth, and Claire, the manager, started giving her the best tables without hesitation. She hadn't asked for any of it, but she noticed it. Respect, when earned through dignity rather than defense, had a way of rippling outward. She didn't think much about Bernard after that second night. To her, it had been one of those moments people remember for different reasons. He would remember it for the lesson, and she would remember it for the strength it required not to meet arrogance with anger. But on Tuesday morning, when she arrived to help set up before opening, Claire was waiting for her near the front desk with a large white envelope in her hands. "This came for you," Claire said, handing it over. No return address. "It was delivered by courier." Maya frowned slightly, brushing the dust off the envelope before opening it. Inside was a neatly folded letter on heavy cream paper, written in careful cursive. It began simply, "Dear Miss, I hope you don't mind my writing. I wanted to thank you for your grace. I realized that evening that fluency doesn't just belong to language, it belongs to character. I owe you an apology, not as a CEO, but as a man who forgot the power of humility. Enclosed is an invitation I hope you'll consider. I understand if you don't, but I would like to make amends properly. Bernard Laurent." Tucked behind the letter was a formal invitation embossed with the name Le Forum International de Linguistique et Culture, an international conference being hosted in Paris that month. Below the printed text was a handwritten note in the same neat penmanship. "They're looking for a speaker to discuss multilingual connection and respect in service industries." "I told them about you." Maya stood still for a long time. "He told them about me?" she murmured, half to herself. Claire leaned over her shoulder, eyes wide. "Wait, is this the real Bernard Laurent? The one from the Global Hospitality Network Board?" "Yes," Maya said quietly. "And he just invited me to speak in Paris." Claire's mouth dropped open. "You have to go." Maya didn't answer right away. She had spent her whole life trying to earn space in rooms that weren't built for her, and suddenly one was being opened because she'd stood her ground with grace. "I don't know," she said softly. "I'm still a student." "I'm just a waitress." Claire shook her head. "You're not just anything. You change the behavior of a man who runs half of Europe's luxury hotels. If that's not worth speaking about, what is?" That night, Maya went home and placed the letter on her kitchen counter. Her apartment was small, just a studio with soft light and books stacked on every surface, but it felt full of quiet peace. She made tea and sat at her table rereading the letter. She didn't trust easily, and part of her wondered if this was just Bernard's attempt to make himself feel better. But as she read his words again, she noticed something different. It wasn't pride, it was reflection. The tone of someone who had looked at himself honestly for the first time in years. She thought of the moment she had replied to him in French, the look on his face when arrogance turned to realization. She hadn't planned it. The words had just come. Maybe that was how truth worked. It didn't need to be rehearsed, it only needed to be real. 2 days later, she made her decision. She sent a short email to the conference organizer listed on the invitation. "Dear Sir or Madam, I accept." Monsieur Reed weeks passed quickly after that. Between her restaurant shifts and her graduate work, she spent late nights drafting her speech. It wasn't an academic lecture or a polished essay. It was a reflection on dignity, language, and empathy. She titled it, "When Words Become Bridges." When she finally arrived in Paris, it was her first time setting foot in the city she had studied for so many years. The streets smelled faintly of coffee and rain, and the sound of the language she loved filled every corner. She felt both small and infinite at once. The conference hall was a sleek, modern building overlooking the Seine. The audience was filled with scholars, executives, and educators. When she stepped onto the stage, a few people whispered, perhaps surprised by how young she was. But when she began speaking, the room grew still. "I learned French not to impress anyone," she began softly, "but because language fascinated me. It connects people who have nothing else in common. It teaches you to listen before you speak. But sometimes," she said, glancing around the room, "people forget that fluency doesn't give them power. It gives them responsibility." Her words hung in the air. And for the next 20 minutes she told her story, not naming names, not describing faces, just painting the moment in truth. How she had been underestimated, how she had responded with calm instead of confrontation, and how understanding a language fully meant also understanding when silence was more powerful than words. When she finished, the room erupted into quiet applause that grew louder and louder until it filled the hall. People stood. Bernard, seated in the front row, clapped slowly, his expression soft and proud, the arrogance gone completely. Afterward, he approached her. "You were extraordinary," he said, switching easily between French and English. "You reminded me that the most intelligent people I've met aren't always the ones speaking the loudest." Maya smiled faintly. "Sometimes silence says more," he nodded. "You were right that night. I didn't see you clearly, but now I do." She looked at him kindly. "Then I'd say we both learned something." That evening, as she walked along the river, the city lights reflected on the water like 1,000 tiny languages, all whispering the same thing: respect. She stopped by a cafe, ordered a cup of tea, and sat quietly by the window. The waiter, not knowing who she was, greeted her warmly in French, and she replied with the same. For once, the exchange was simple, mutual, and equal, exactly how it was always meant to be. Would you like me to continue with part 4, the final part? When Maya returned home from Paris, life didn't change overnight, but something in her perspective had quietly shifted. The familiar clatter of dishes, the aroma of sautéed herbs, the hum of conversation inside the restaurant, all felt both the same and entirely new. The walls that had once enclosed her world now felt like the beginning of something larger. Her first night back on shift, Claire met her at the door with an excited grin. "I made the local paper," she said, handing over a folded copy of the Boston Herald. On the second page was a small article titled, "Local Waitress Captivates Paris Linguistics Forum." There was no photograph, just a short write-up about her talk on communication and respect. The journalist had called her a voice of quiet strength in an age of arrogance. Maya read it once and smiled. "I didn't go there to make headlines," she said softly. "I know," Claire replied. "That's why you did." The dinner rush that night was steady. Customers filled every table, laughter bouncing against the soft jazz playing through the speakers. Maya moved through it all as she always had, graceful, unhurried, every motion deliberate. But now even strangers seemed to notice something in her calm presence, something dignified that went beyond service. Halfway through her shift, Claire came over with a hesitant expression. "How you might want to see who's sitting at table 6. Maya glanced over her shoulder. Bernard sat there alone again, this time in a simple grey suit. There was no entourage, no quiet arrogance, no watch meant to gleam under the light. He looked ordinary, thoughtful. When their eyes met, he smiled, not the smirk from that first night, but a genuine, almost humble smile. She walked over slowly, balancing a tray on one hand. "Good evening, monsieur." "Good evening, Miss Reed," he replied, rising from his seat slightly out of respect. "I hope I'm not intruding. I came to return something." He reached into his jacket and handed her the small note she had once written him, the one that said, "Respect doesn't require translation." It was now framed in glass, simple and clean. "I keep it in my office," he said, "but I thought you should have it back." "You earned those words." Maya looked down at it for a moment before replying. "No," she said softly. "You should keep it. You're the one who still needs to remember them." Bernard nodded, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "Fair enough. Then it stays where it is." He paused, then added, "I wanted to tell you, after your speech, our company launched a cultural respect initiative. Mandatory language training, ethics, communication, all of it. Your words started something." Maya tilted her head. "That wasn't my goal." "Maybe not," he said. "But change doesn't need permission to begin." She smiled faintly. "I'm glad you listened." He nodded. "I had to. You were the first person in a long time who didn't try to impress me or fear me. You just told the truth." Maya set down his glass of water, her tone gentle. "Sometimes the truth doesn't need volume. It just needs timing." Bernard looked around the restaurant, the soft light reflecting in his eyes. "You're still here. For now," she said. "I'm finishing my degree this year. After that, I'll teach. Maybe even publish. But this place—" She looked around at the tables, the people, the quiet laughter. This place taught me more about communication than any classroom ever could. He nodded slowly. If you ever find yourself in Paris again, there will always be a place for you in our program. I'll keep that in mind, she said, smiling politely. When he left that night, there was no grand farewell, no symbolic gesture, just a handshake, simple, respectful, human. The kind that meant both sides understood something deeper now. After he was gone, Maya stood by the window for a moment, watching his car disappear into the night. The city lights shimmered on the glass, reflecting her face back at her. She thought about everything that had happened, the insult, the silence that followed, the response that changed the room and how it had all led here. She hadn't planned any of it, but maybe the best moments weren't planned at all. They just came when someone chose to stay calm instead of small. When her shift ended, she walked home through quiet streets, the night air cool against her skin. Passing a small cafe, she paused to look through the window at a young waitress serving a table of well-dressed men. The girl laughed politely, nervous but kind, her hands trembling slightly as she carried a tray. Maya smiled to herself, seeing a reflection of who she once was. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of the framed note Bernard had given back to her earlier that night, its words glowing softly under the restaurant lights. She posted it to her small online account with a short caption, "Dignity is the language everyone understands." As she slipped her phone back into her coat pocket, she felt light. The world around her was quiet, but she knew her words and her silence had gone farther than she ever imagined. She turned the corner toward her apartment, the rhythm of her footsteps soft against the pavement, her heart steady with the kind of peace that came not from victory, but from understanding.